for hosting this event. For those of you that do not know, ACRO is an organization that is dedicated to supporting the field of radiation oncology. Our residency committee in particular focuses on providing educational opportunities, mentorship, and scholarships for radiation oncology trainees. If you have not already done so, I would encourage you to join ACRO. It's completely free for trainees. Additionally, you can follow us on Twitter at ACRO Resident, where we'll be keeping up to date with all of the latest information about applying to radiation oncology residency. In terms of tonight's webinar, we have a highly informative program for you. We will be hearing from two awesome program directors about the residency application process. First, Dr. Henson will discuss the residency application, followed by Dr. Tendulkar, who will discuss the interview process. We will conclude with having a Q&A session with all of our panelists. And while we have some questions that were submitted in advance, please feel free to add your questions to our chat box as we go through tonight's webinar. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future review on the ACRO website. So before we get started, I'd like to just do a couple poll questions so we can get to know our audience a little better. So if you'll just give us about 30 to 40 seconds here just to answer these poll questions so we can better understand who we're speaking to tonight.
And while you answer those polls, you'll see the chat function should be available for all of you. I have put a link into our ACRO website to join as a medical student. Like Nima said, this is a great resource to get involved. And then, oops, I posted it twice. I'm about to post the Twitter handle.
Okay, we'll give you guys 10 more seconds for the poll here. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alexis.
I think she might be putting Hudson away, so I might just go ahead and introduce myself because I think that was what she was going to do. I'm Christina Henson. I'm the program director for radiation oncology at the University of Oklahoma. And I am joining you today from Rocky Mountain National Park, where I'm on vacation with my family. But I'm happy to be taking an hour out of that to meet with all of you guys and talk to you about the field that I love. I introduced myself, Alexis.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to have a little disaster. Dr. Henson, are you sharing slides?
Oh, okay. We're not doing it. I forgot if we were introducing Dr. Tendulkar. That's later. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you guys about the application process. Let me start with my first slide. Okay, so people often have a lot of questions about the application itself. So I'm going to just talk to you guys about prepping your ARIS application. My presentation is not going to take super long, and I think we have received a lot of good Q&A questions, so we'll have plenty of time for those. The main points as far as your ARIS application are, we want to get a sense of who you are. Would you be a good fit within our program? We want to see your personality come through on your application. So of course it should be professional, but and I'll talk about it on some of the future slides, but it's definitely okay and good to let your personality kind of come through in your application. We want to know how you're unique, what you can bring to our table. And one more really big point is anything that you talk about in your application, be ready to discuss it at your interview. So if you've been involved in a research project and you've listed that on your application, even if it was a pretty small thing or you had a minor role, if you're listing it on your application, make sure that you are prepared to discuss it. You know, there's a 95% chance no one will ask you about that thing, but on the 5% chance that it does happen, you definitely want to make sure you seem like you know what you did. A lot of people, it seems like, especially lately, stress out about the photo. do not stress out about your photo. Make sure that you can see your face, that the lighting's okay and your hair is out of your face. But you know, these are obviously kind of jokes, they're glamour shots. But if you wanted to include a glamour shot, that would be okay too. I looked for an old glamour shot to put in this presentation. Unfortunately, my mom could not find it for me. A lot of people will redact the photo from the application in trying to keep the playing field level and eliminate bias. So at our program, for example, my program coordinator redacts photos, names, dates of birth, hometown, and gender from applications. So there's a good chance that no one's even going to see your photo until they've invited you for an interview, and they need to just know who they're looking for, you know, in the lobby, basically. Letters of recommendation are very important. These are, I think the program directors, at least I put a lot of stock in what the letters of recommendation say. A lot of people are worried that they don't have a close relationship with like 3 different rad-oncs that they can ask for letters, but that's okay. They don't need to be from rad-oncs. They don't need to be from famous people or, you know, premier rad-oncs. The most important thing is to make sure they're people who know you, and they're not just going to write like a 5-sentence generic letter. And you want to have a pretty good idea that they're people who like you and on whom you've made a good impression. So mine, for example, were from 2 gyn-onc surgeons, and I am attending, and then from 1 rad-onc. You should try to have at least 1 from a rad-onc. And if you are interested in matching to your home program, it might look a little bit weird if you don't have a letter from somebody in that program. But counter to that, if you, for example, don't have a home program, you know, we understand situations like that. And usually, you know, you get to that in other sections of your application. The hobby section, I think, is like the most underrated section. I think this is where we kind of get a sense of like those things like what make you unique. And some of my favorite ones I've seen have been like collecting sneakers, hip hop music. If you want to talk about, if you have kids or have, you know, particular family members or pets that you want to talk about in your interview, you have to bring those things up. We can't. But so if, you know, but by all means, if you want to bring up children during your interview, you can. We just cannot ask you about that. If you want to mention hanging out with family and your hobbies, you know, you can do that. We just want to know that you have interests outside of work and are somewhat well-rounded. You know, we know everyone doesn't have a ton of free time and probably hasn't mastered like 5 musical instruments, but you know, just what do you do outside of work? So, and then the personal statement, people tend to have pretty strong feelings about the personal statement. Some people hate it and like don't read them. I, again, really like the personal statement. It doesn't have to be on anything in particular. It can be about why you love the field. It can be about a certain patient experience that really shaped you maybe during medical school, and that possibly drove your desire to pursue oncology. And also it can help be an area where you can kind of explain something adverse, I guess, or considered adverse in your application. If you had a gap in training for taking care of an ailing family member, or a death in the family, or something like that, that you feel like contributed to a really low board score, that would be a place where you could explain something like that. And I think this was one of the programs that came in, or questions that came in through the Q&A. So we'll probably touch on this more later, but a lot of people want to know how many programs should I apply to? There's not a magic number. Right now, the field and the match process is hugely in favor of the applicant. So you don't need to apply to, you know, 50 programs like maybe had been the advice, you know, 5 or 10 years ago. But you want to apply to enough that you feel like you've got good options, and you want to strike that balance. You don't want to burn out. You know, things are mostly going to be virtual this year, which is a lot easier, avoiding all that travel, but it is still exhausting. It's a lot of repetitive conversations. And if you are not an extrovert, or even if you are an extrovert, that can be really exhausting, and you don't want to seem bored or, you know, you just don't want to seem like you're bored and exhausted during your interview. So I think 20 to 30 is a good ballpark range. There's nothing magic about that number. You could probably do a lot fewer and be fine. again, a perk of them being virtual is that it's much less expensive. And so hopefully that's opening up a lot more opportunities for people and creating a lot less debt for people coming out of medical school. Sometimes people ask, what can I do to increase my odds of getting an interview with a program that I'm especially interested in? I have very concrete thoughts on this. Reach out to the program coordinator and or the program director in advance via email to express your interest and why. And the big thing is really only do this to potentially a few programs that you're extra interested in. Do not send these types of emails to all the programs because we're a small community. All the program coordinators talk to one another, and we're going to know if there's someone sending out a generic email to all 80 programs saying, I really want your program, and that's not going to look good. So, but if you do, you know, I've had some in the past where maybe someone, you know, at face value, it would be like, why would this person want to come to Oklahoma? And what we don't know is that maybe their parents live here, or they grew up here and they've always wanted to move back. And that's, you know, something that could definitely be an important piece of information to convey via email. What should you do if you haven't gotten, so say maybe you didn't reach out to a program that you really wanted to hear from, and you don't have to reach out to programs, but say you don't get an interview at a place that you really are interested in. You can reach out after interview invitations have been sent out and kind of like on the prior slide, explain why you're interested. You may have been filtered out via geographic filters and things like that, and just be genuine and honest. And maybe the most important line on this whole slide presentation, be nice to program coordinators. Nothing looks worse than being condescending to a program coordinator or trying to tell them. That's all that I'll say about that. How much do scores matter? This is quite a debate right now. The main thing is that RADONC, there's 4 sets of boards that have to be passed, and they're challenging, and we just want to know that people can pass them. So no magic number, and don't let one bad score dissuade you from applying if you're really passionate about the field. So that's the end of my presentation. I will stop sharing. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Henson. And chat is open, so we can, any questions that you have right now, you can go ahead and put in the chat and we'll answer them after, you know, Dr. Tendulkar goes. So I am going to introduce him. So this is Dr. Tendulkar. He is from Cleveland Clinic. He is an associate staff physician in the Department of Radiation Oncology at Cleveland Clinic, where he joined faculty in 2008. He currently serves as the clinical director and residency program director for the Department of Radiation Oncology. His clinical research interests include developing risk stratification models in the treatment of breast and GU cancers, as well as physician leadership development.
Great, thank you, Alexis, and I'm really honored to be invited. And Dr. Henson is one of my favorite co-program directors out there, and I 100% agree with everything she just said. I still remember some of the memorable hobbies that people have listed. My all-time favorite of which one person just listed like cheese as a one-word list of hobbies. So you know, we do pay attention to these things, and it's kind of fun. Let me see if I can share the slides. Can you see these okay? Great. I get to talk a little bit about the interview experience itself. So my first disclosure is that I use a very old school blue and yellow PowerPoint combination because I went to Michigan and my favorite colors are maize and blue, as you can probably see from the poster behind me. So that's the only relevant disclosure here. So we're going to talk about how to first learn the rules, which are set by the NRMP, so that we can play the game, which is maximize the odds of matching where you want to go for residency training. So the NRMP was founded in 1952, and this was to replace a competing system of exploding offers. So basically, it was a free-for-all back then. A program might say to a trainee, "Hey, do you want to come here for residency? If so, tell me the next day, and if not, then they'll offer it to somebody else." And so it was really not an ideal system. applicants didn't get to see a lot of programs that way. Programs wanted to lock in people that they thought were good. So that's where the match really algorithm came from, and it was designed to favor the applicant's rank order list. So remember that it goes down your rank lists, not necessarily the programs. It sort of prioritizes that. And this whole process, kind of programs and applicants undergo a sort of courtship between the interviews and by the time you come to this rank order list deadline. And it's really like it's a lot of it's basically like a speed dating kind of process where you're trying to find somebody who might be a good match for your program, from the program's perspective and for the trainee's perspective as well. So I thought it was important to start off with the NRMP Code of Conduct because it's something that applicants may or may not be as familiar with. So number one is respecting an applicant's right to privacy and confidentiality. So program directors and other interviewers are not really allowed to ask you about what other programs you're applying to, what other specialties you may be applying to. And so just kind of keep that in mind. These are things that they're not supposed to do. Some interviewers may not know that they're not supposed to do this, but really it's the job of the program directors to educate everybody that is participating in the interview process. And so, if you come across one of these types of things, you may have to kind of gently avoid the question if you don't feel comfortable addressing it. But again, just know that this is a thing. Number two, the program director is responsible for all actions of the entire team, as I mentioned. Number three, there are illegal / unlawful questions that we're not supposed to ask in an interview setting that can include questions about age, gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, family status. So again, be aware of those rights. Programs should not require second visits for people to come back for interviews. I think thankfully in radiation oncology, this has not been an issue, but in other specialties, second visits I think have been common in the past. And so they're really trying to reduce the onus on applicants. And then lastly, discouraging unnecessary post-interview communication. Really, people are allowed to talk, but I think the key is avoiding disingenuous communications that might be done for the purpose of interviewing prospective ranking preferences. And so, the so-called gamesmanship has been an issue that's been well documented in the literature. Unfortunately, the code here is kind of subject to interpretation and difficult to enforce. And obviously, programs are trying to get the best outcome. Applicants are trying to get the best outcome. So this kind of gamesmanship issue does happen. And unfortunately, dishonesty, again, at least in the past, has been problematic. In one study, 60% of applicants were notified more than one program that they would rank it highly, whatever that means. And a number of PDs have reported false claims of an applicant ranking their program as number one and then not matching there. And on the flip side, in another study, over half of applicants reported being told that they would be either ranked to match or ranked highly, and many of them changed the rank list in response to this type of post-interview communication. So unfortunately, this gamesmanship goes both ways. I thought this was the most important aspect, which is that for programs who are perceived to behave unethically by an applicant, they're more likely to fall down an applicant's rank list. And so it really is important for programs, especially to take this stuff seriously and not lead people on. And so I have been fortunate to give a similar type of talk to our program directors every year at the Cleveland Clinic regarding best practices and try to educate them about all of these things so that we can avoid some of these issues. In the field of radiation oncology, this was actually well documented a few years ago, a publication that came out talking about this and some editorials that followed. Including one that we tried to share our best practices. So the way we do things in our department, all of our faculty are re-educated annually about the types of questions that they're allowed and not allowed to ask. And we try to explain to the applicants very explicitly what our process is. And so we try to compile objective ratings on interview day, not afterwards, so that any impact of post-interview communication isn't taken into consideration, and every interviewer counts equally. So the program directors doesn't count any more than any other interviewer, nor does the chair or anybody. So we try to be pretty democratic and objective that way. and again, it's really up to the programs, I think, to lead with integrity. Okay, so some maxims about interviewing. So these are just some kind of casual thoughts that I thought were important. So number one, remember, interviews are like speed dating. You kind of have 15, maybe 20 minutes to get to know the person across the table from you. And so, being prepared with thoughtful questions is important, but it's really hard to dive deep into things. And this is where, having, putting some good information into your application really streamlines this process. Where you get invited for interviews is a total crapshoot. It's a numbers game. There are indeed regional biases that exist. And, so it's one of those things, don't take it personally. We at our program typically interview about 40-ish people, 35 to 40 people for 3 spots. When there were 200 applicants applying every year, that meant we were rejecting 80% of people who applied. And I would have loved to have met more, but we have a limited number of spots. The ratio is a little bit more in your favor now, but the other challenge with virtual interviews is a lot more people can interview at a lot of places. And so, that just adds some complexity. Next, don't worry if you happen to be invited off of a wait list. Frankly, only maybe the program director and coordinator even know if you were ever on a wait list. And so most interviews have no idea. You just sort of show up on their interview schedule, and that's who they meet. So don't think of yourself as any less. Again, it's a numbers game, and we usually have a pretty robust wait list of people, and every year we get to invite a few people off of that, and have matched residents who we had interviewed off of the wait list. Current residents are your best source of information, so try to spend as much time with them as possible. I cannot stress this enough. Having time alone with them really gives you the most insight into kind of the ins and outs of the program. And this may be your only chance to see a lot of programs. I don't know that there's an optimal number of programs to apply to, as Dr. Henson mentioned, but I a little bit regret not interviewing at more, or not applying or interviewing at more, because for me, many of my own memories of what different places were like were based on that one interview day. And yes, a couple decades later, things have changed, but in retrospect, it might have been nice to see a few places. So, take advantage of it when you can, especially with the virtual interviews. All right, so in terms of best practices for the interview, so there's a few things you can do before interview day, on interview day, and afterwards. So beforehand, first of all, do your homework. So what this means is, look at program track records. So job placement, board pass rates, research productivity, those kinds of things. Is it the kind of stuff that you want to be doing when you're in those shoes? Websites are, I think, good for this stuff, hopefully. But again, talking to current residents and even alumni, these meet and greet sessions could be really helpful to learn more about these things. When you're preparing for the interviews, research who you're going to be interviewing with. You may only find out a day in advance or something like that, but I think just take a quick look at the websites and the bios for the faculty interviewers. What kind of research are they doing? What disease sites do they treat? Do they have any special interests that stand out? Just so you're prepared for that conversation. Be wary of hearsay. There's a lot of, we live in an age of misinformation and disinformation. It's really hard to know what's real and truth and what's not. So, again, that's where I think talking to as many residents and alumni as possible to kind of get to that is important. And as Dr. Henson had pointed out, really know your own ARIS application inside and out, because chances are you'll be asked about some stuff in there. Number two, because of COVID, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think even when I was putting this slide deck together a few weeks ago, I thought there might be some more in-person interviews. As the Delta variant is surging, who knows what's going to happen, but I think we're probably going to be doing a lot of virtual interviews again this year. So in preparation for this, have at least one business suit, maybe a second if you can afford it, and or if you spill coffee on it or something like that. For the virtual interviews, locate a quiet space that has good Wi-Fi and good lighting. Practice your AV computer setup with a friend, and practice interviewing, some kind of basic types of questions that you might encounter. Obviously, virtual interviews have some good and bad. Advantages are that there's decreased cost to the applicants, which is great. Decreased carbon footprint, you're not flying around the country. and no travel delays, especially in the winter weather. And also you can interview at more programs. Some of the downsides, though, is you kind of miss seeing out on the city, especially at a lot of places where you may not have been before. You may miss out on the kind of the culture of the department and seeing some of the informal interactions that really kind of give you insight into what each place is like. And in the setting, you might only hear about the positives of a program, given a formal presentation and limited interactions. So this is where doing the homework piece is really important. Then, of course, you may encounter technical difficulties. So again, trying to anticipate that and avoiding that as much as possible. What if you're given interview invitations on the same day and you have to kind of select what to do? Well, unfortunately, you might have to make some tough choices. And I think ultimately what it comes down to when making that decision is, looking for something that might be a good fit, I think is more important than looking for something that's, ranked more highly or is more prestigious, so to speak. And I know that's, really all very subjective, but sometimes these, again, choices are just tough to make. Don't be afraid to ask program coordinators if you happen to get a date that you already have committed to something else. Ask if there's another one that's available to swap. A lot of times the program coordinators may know of other applicants who are looking to swap as well. And so hopefully that, can work out. So when you actually get to interview day, we all want to make a good impression. So some ways to do that, I think, as Dr. Henson said, be genuine, be kind, be confident in, as one of my residents said, in your intrinsic self-worth, which means, during the interview, assert your strengths. Again, be humble about it, but I think be assertive about what you're going to bring to the table and how you can contribute to the program and to the field. I think showing engagement and interest in the program is really important. I'm always surprised every year. There's some folks who come through and they look like they're kind of bored or they'd rather not be there. And that's always a bit surprising, that especially when people would spend money to travel here, it's always kind of shocking a little bit. So I'm not saying fake interest, but if you're going somewhere, treat it as if you might match there, and so take that part seriously. I always enjoy people who ask kind of thoughtful questions that are not just canned, but maybe based on some of the conversation that we've had as part of the interview. And I think that always comes across showing some kind of, again, genuine interest. And then lastly, kindness, humility, and gratitude really go a long way. We're all looking for people that we're going to be working with for the next 4+ years, and you can't get enough of these things. One slide I've always liked to share is this one, 10 things that require 0 talent. So being on time, work ethic, effort, body language, energy, attitude, passion, being coachable, doing extra, and being prepared. When we see people and are meeting them for in-person interviews, I always like to see these things, body language and how they interact with other people. That's something I've been missing with virtual interviews, so it's a little bit harder to see how people work well with others. But again, these are things that require no talent, and so you can't go wrong demonstrating them. And then, as mentioned, after interview day, I think it's really best to try to avoid post-interview communication as much as possible. We try to tell every we try to tell every applicant, please don't send thank you emails or cards. We make our evaluations based on your, interview today, so it won't have any bearing. So if they tell you not to write it, just believe them. And if programs do contact you, I think, be respectful and diplomatic. You don't have to feel like you need to reciprocate interest, in this way. And again, engaging in this kind of gamesmanship can be stressful and counterproductive. And then I think lastly, making a rank list. Again, I think the most important thing is rank where you want to go, not where you think you might match, right? So the algorithm favors the applicant's rank list, so it kind of goes down your list. So, if you want to aspire to, your favorite place, even if you think you might not be there, that's okay. That's what you want to be doing, because you never know with the match, and the whole thing is designed to get you at the best place. Some things that I personally think are overrated is focusing too much on program rankings or prestige and technology, because these are things that kind of change, and at the end of the day, I don't think they result in people being necessarily happy, or even getting the best training for you. Stuff that I think is underrated is culture. So programs where residents are supported, there's camaraderie and collegiality and teamwork. The focus on having a focus on clinical education and learning and resident quality of life. I think generally these are things I personally value and I think are kind of underrated oftentimes in the rank list making. So just to summarize, I think the match is designed for the best mutual outcomes. I think if you know the rules, you can better play the game. And just remember stuff that faculty should not be asking you about, as kind of listed here. Again, if you do encounter these things, programs really have to know that applicants take these things seriously, and they may actually be harming themselves in the process if they do this stuff. So. This is mostly just for your own knowledge. So really thank you for your attention today, and look forward to any questions and discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Tendulkar. So we have a couple questions that were submitted via the ACRO drive. And so we're going to start going through those as well. We have a couple in the chat box that we're going to go over. I will introduce myself while Nima pulls up those slides. Sorry, I had a barking dog earlier. My name is Alexis Schutz. I'm a PGY3 at the University of Oklahoma. So Dr. Henson and I are at the same program. I am on the ACRO resident committee with NEMA. I am the scholarship chair, so I work mostly with the educational and seed grants that we give out. We're working on actually getting a medical student grant. ACRO is a organization, like Nima said, and our annual meeting is going to be next March in Fort Lauderdale, and you are all welcome to join us down there. So if you go ahead and see the link in the chat box to join ACRO, I think it's a great resource for medical students and even a better one for when you join residency.
Okay, let me get our questions that were already submitted pulled up, and we'll also get to the questions that you guys have submitted on the chat. So in advance, and we'll kind of discuss these as a group. So this one, I think Dr. Henson briefly touched on this. So, this particular student was asking, can you have a failure on step 1 or step 2 and still apply to radiation oncology? And I think this also speaks to kind of that larger question of, how should an applicant address, these kind of hiccups potentially in their, training or experience?
So I think that this is where other parts of your application need to be really strong. So your personal statement, your letters of recommendation, if you have people writing your letters who can really speak to what does make you outstanding, that will go a long way. If there was some sort of extenuating life circumstance that you feel like contributed to it, explain that in your personal statement. Don't make something up. I mean, sometimes you just have a bad day. But again, if you're like, parent died the day before your test or something, that's something worth talking about. And just do be prepared to speak on it in your interviews, because you will probably be asked about it. But I would definitely still apply if you're truly strongly interested.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I completely agree. I think, ultimately, it always comes down to a numbers game. In past years when there were many more applicants than positions, it would have been really hard for somebody who's failed either of the step exams to successfully match. In an era, if there's more spots than applicants, the odds increase. So, again, if you're very dedicated to the field and are able to demonstrate that you're going to be successful in the specialty, then yeah, I think bolster your application as best possible.
Yeah, and I think as someone, so in my personal medical school experience, I didn't have the best step 1 score. Definitely turned it around for step 2, and so my advice would be, be prepared. You don't necessarily have to address it if you don't want to, but be prepared for someone to ask you about it, because it's likely that it would probably come up at some point. So definitely, be prepared to explain, why you think that happened. Was there a particular issue? Did you fix the issue? And I wouldn't be, taken aback, if someone asked you that. Really, they're just trying to get a sense of what was going on and, figure out. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so this next question is, how's the application and interview process different for students that have graduated from international medical schools?
I don't know, Christina, if you want me to take this one, but the process is largely the same. I think the challenge from a program director's perspective is, it's a little bit harder to gauge, gauge an applicant who's trained elsewhere in another country, especially at schools that we may not know very well or be as familiar with. And so, ways to distinguish yourself, again, if somebody does extraordinarily well on, their step scores, again, that's one measure that sometimes people have historically used, even though that looks like step one will be going away in the next couple of years. And, letters of recommendation are I think, even probably of more importance for IMGs, just to have people who can vouch for a lot of your qualities. But otherwise, I think it's going to be largely similar.
I agree, and I think in the past, when it was a bit more competitive, unfortunately, there's more work that goes into processing everything for IMGs, and so a lot of people would just use that as kind of a filter because they have the option to not mess with that, if you will. And now that that's not the case anymore, I think it's not such an issue.
And is there any particular way you think, an IMG might be able to stand out through the process?
I think the biggest thing is to demonstrate like sustained interest in the field via your letters, via what your research has been. And it definitely, especially I think if you're an IMG, I don't think it hurts to reach out to program directors, try to get an away rotation set up if you can. I know that's harder these days. But yeah.
Okay. So let's see. Our next question. So this person wants to train in a region where they do not have any direct ties. So how can they stand out to programs within their region of interest?
I think this is one where, as I kind of mentioned in my slides, I would just send an email if there's a couple of programs in particular in that region, and just say, why you're interested in that region. Just kind of introduce yourself. Doesn't need to be anything beyond that. I don't know if Dr. Tendulkar has other thoughts.
No, I totally agree. I think it's, sometimes the geographic biases do exist in terms of who gets invited for interviews. I think it was especially a bigger issue when we had in-person interviews. So if I saw two applicants on paper, and one of them was driving distance and one of them was flying distance, the one on flying distance was probably more likely to cancel than the one who's driving distance away. Just the reality of it. And so, if two people are otherwise equal, you might, programs might select people that way. And, so if you do have specific ties or specific interest in a region, I think it's always helpful to either state that in your personal statement, which, by the way, you can customize for each different program if you wanted to go through that effort. Or you could maybe send an email to the program coordinator.
Okay.
And then off of that.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, related to what Dr. Tendulkar just said, if you end up needing to cancel an interview for whatever reason, or just feeling like you've interviewed at enough places and you're over it, that's okay. Just make sure you give programs as much heads up as you can. Nothing looks worse than canceling like the night before your interview, or just not showing up to the social event the night before. So, if you can give programs as much heads up as you can, because they've probably already lined up their breakout rooms and have you slotted to interview with people at certain times. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Dr. Henson. And yeah, ideally like 2 or 3 weeks, if you have that amount of time, I think is really appreciated.
I know a lot of people, schedule as many interviews as they can in the beginning because they're not sure exactly how many they're going to get and when the dates are going to fall. And so, within a couple of weeks, usually the programs have sent out all of their interviews. So you should be able to look at your schedule and say, hey, I've got enough. Giving the program ahead of time, a couple of weeks helps. And like Dr. Tendulkar said, there's people on the waiting list. So, don't be selfish and take up a spot for someone that could really, like and match up that program. And so you're giving someone else a chance to really interview somewhere that they could be highly interested in, that you're just using as like a warm-up interview or just an extra one that you don't care about. So I think being genuine and kind during this process also goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think from an organizational standpoint, when it comes to scheduling interviews, I know, things are a little different in the virtual era. But I know for me, I print out a calendar of each month of the interview season, and I would write out on the calendar, this interview at this time, so that I always had something to reference, because these interviews you're getting the invitations at all different times. There isn't just like a one set day that everyone in the country invites you. And so it's over a several week period. So I think as an applicant, it's also important to kind of be on top of your schedule yourself. Because if you can stay organized, then you can kind of, hopefully avoid some of these scheduling issues. Because a lot of times too, programs will have multiple dates, and they might, be able to offer you at the beginning, if you respond quickly enough, several options. And so if you know what your schedule is going into it, that does, really, I think, help you out in the end too.
I did the same thing with the written schedule. It was the best way to keep track of everything. I highly recommend it.
Yours is still going strong.
Okay, so let's see next. So who would the applicant speak to during the interview day? And then kind of piggybacking off of that, any tips on how to prepare for the interviews?
So usually most interviews involve several faculty members that may include physicists or radiobiologists at certain programs. You may interview with current residents. Usually I feel like people aren't interviewing with other department personnel like administrators, but I suppose that's possible, I guess. But you will be interacting with program coordinators and front desk people and stuff. And again, just fall back on the be kind to everybody when you're there, and that is noticed.
Agree with all of that.
I think, like Dr. Tendulkar mentioned earlier, how should you prepare? I think you should absolutely look up, especially the physicians that you'll be talking with, know who the program coordinator is, know that she's not, or he or she is not a physician, know the residency director. I mean, that's going to be your biggest one. And, just prepare so that you're not blindsided when you don't know who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm. And something that Dr. Tendulkar mentioned in his slides that stuck out to me was that something about your intrinsic self-worth. This isn't something that I did, but I feel like it's something I would recommend writing a letter of recommendation for yourself. Obviously not to submit, but just to kind of, you're probably going to get asked a million times what strengths do you feel like you bring to the table, and it's not human nature for people to boost themselves like that. So if you haven't prepared for that, you might have one of those like deer in headlight moments where you're like, what am I good at? Or what are my good qualities? It's probably a really good idea to kind of think through those things, maybe write some of them out in advance.
Yeah, and I think from Alexis can also comment on her experience, but I know from my experience applying, I feel like there's just certain questions you also kind of have to have down packed. Like you hopefully don't go in the interview not being able to answer like why you want to do radiation oncology. I feel like you're not going to escape an interview day without being asked that. Be prepared. Like if you're at a program, you might get asked, why are you interested in this program? That's a common one. Other things, there's also those oddball questions, which I don't think you can always prepare for those, but maybe if you find a list online of kind of like oddball interview questions. I know some that stood out to me. I've been asked, what kind of animal would you be and why? What kind of cereal would you be and why? So things like that. So most of them I think are pretty straightforward. You can prepare for, who you are, what your strengths are, what your potential weaknesses are. But be prepared for those kind of oddball questions as well.
I never understood those oddball questions, frankly. I don't know what you do with that information. So I don't even bother asking those. So I hope you don't experience too many.
We don't. I've never asked someone what cereal they would like to be.
Save that for the.
I would love trying to like read into those answers.
Yeah, that should be saved for like the the interview dinner the night before as a icebreaker, not an interview day question.
Yeah, I always thought that they would just ask those more of a like really to catch you off guard, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but just I just want to let everyone know, just be prepared because you may get a question like that. Okay, what else do we have here? Okay, so we briefly touched on this. So is there a magic number of programs you need to interview at in order to match? Any thoughts?
So,
I think historically the number 10 was thrown about, having like double digit interviews. I think in the modern era, it's probably less than that even. It's actually really hard to say because with virtual interviews, one of the challenges is a really strong applicant might get 40, 50 interview invitations. When they were flying across the country, they would be limited. It would be really expensive to go to more than 12 or 15. But if you can interview at 30 or 40 virtually at no cost, that takes up a lot of interview spots. And so I think in the virtual era, it's a really kind of hard number to put down, but it's probably not more than 10.
I remember being told how many years ago, I don't know, 10 plus years ago, that if you interviewed at, like you said, 10 to 11 places, there was like a 95% chance you'd match. So it must be somewhat lower now.
And I know that NRMP match data, they come out with a chart and you can look at it. That's usually pretty accurate. As you know, the last 2 years for radiation oncology, there haven't been as many applicants as previously. So it really will just depend on the interview cycle. We won't know how many people are applying until the applications are submitted for UMass. So just keep that in mind. Could be a heavy year of applicants, could be like the last 2 years, but I think like we talked about 20 to 30 program for applicants, and then just trying to interview at which ones actually you're interested in. I think we haven't really touched on this either. Don't interview at a program you're not interested in. Don't do that, and also don't rank a program you're not interested in, because I think the worst thing that could happen is you get placed at an institution that you weren't interested in, you did not like, and so don't rank it. Don't put it on your rank list. If you don't like a program or you don't want to go there, you don't want to live in that city, don't rank it.
Great advice.
Yeah, and I think off of Alexis's point, don't interview if you're not interested, because I know last year as a resident interviewing medical students, I feel like, the interviewers can tell a little bit if you're not interested. Even on Zoom, we don't necessarily have your full body language, but, even just your face, if you're not interested, usually we can tell.
Yeah, so don't waste your time.
Yeah, don't waste your time and everyone else's. Okay, so I think there might have been something in the chat about this as well. So what features should students look for in a radiation oncology residency program, and what are some potential red flags? So I think there were a couple of questions, Dr. Tendulkar, off of your presentation about, what makes a good culture, what makes like a good residency quality of life. So let's get your guys' thoughts.
Someone asked about how to ask about education too.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Henson, I'll defer to you first.
Okay, I had started to type a response to the education thing, and then I figured we were going to touch on it in the Q&A slide. So I think education is probably the easiest one to answer. I would definitely ask both residents and faculty what the didactics are like at the program. You want to get a sense from the residents of, Do they seem like they get excited when they're talking about the didactics? Well, first off, do they even describe any didactics, or is it like, well, every other week we have a lecture, you know, that wouldn't be good. So you want to know when they have physics, when they have radiation biology, when they're having their clinical didactics, how often do they have guest lectures or visiting professors? Those are good things to ask that kind of show that the program is invested in resident education. And just then same, it's a good question to ask the faculty when you're having interviews with faculty. Do they seem like they know what's going on with the residency education? You can get a good sense for that. I don't know, any other thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, the quality of the educational sessions is important, and every program does things differently. You know, at our program, I think we're pretty well known for having a Socratic-based case conference where you know, we're kind of expecting the residents to, you know, I think gentle pimping is how I like to think of it. But you know, we were going to go through cases and ask the residents, like, all right, what would you do here? You know, what are your thoughts there? You know, how do you support that? Just to kind of get people to practice that. And that style may not be for everyone. Some people learn better from, you know, more of a didactic, more of a little passive learning. Others learn better from more active learning like this. And so I think look for a style that fits what you're looking for. Some people don't like to be put on the spot, and that's okay. And so maybe don't rank highly a program where that's routinely practiced. I think in terms of how do you identify a good culture, this is, again, where talking with the residents is really important. You know, I think a great question to ask is, if you had to do it over again, would you want to train at the program that you're at, right? And if you get overwhelmingly from a lot of residents, yeah, I love it here, I'm happy, you know, they're not going to lie to you during those types of things, I think. Another, you know, just one of the red flags I think I look out for is cross coverage. Sometimes I know when I'd gone through the process forever ago, almost two decades ago, you know, one of the things that I sort of discovered was that, you know, at some places, if you have to take vacation as a resident, that meant one of your colleagues had to cover stuff for you in the clinic. And, you know, that has an impact on your learning and quality of life and that sort of stuff. So that to me was something that was important, and something that I still feel strongly about now as a program director, that, you know, when our residents are taking vacation, they shouldn't have to stress out about finding somebody else to do their work. If they're on vacation, they should be on vacation. You know, I think also, I'm always surprised to hear that a lot of programs don't highlight their teaching conference. Like, we always incorporate that as part of our interview day, because I think it's something that if somebody's going to come here for 4 years, they should know what they're getting themselves into. And I'm always surprised that not every program necessarily does that. So, you know, if you have an opportunity to see how residents are able to verbalize what they've learned, I think that's a way for a program to really show off how strong their trainees are. You know, when, you know, the senior residents can spout off, you know, stuff as a seasoned attending, that to me is impressive, or would be impressive, I guess, as an applicant. So those are some of the things that come to mind. And then lastly, the culture piece. You know, again, is it a place where the residents are looking out for each other and feel collegial and aren't afraid to go to their program leadership with issues if stuff needs to be fixed? You know, are the faculty supportive of the trainees? And these are all things that I think, again, the current residents and recent alumni sometimes can help with.
I think that last piece, especially a good, because, you know, you can ask, do you feel comfortable bringing things up? And, you know, that yes or no, but I think a good way to get at that would be to ask a resident or faculty, when has there been an issue? You know, ask the residents, when has there been an issue that you guys have wanted addressed? And, you know, how receptive do you feel like the faculty or the program are to changing things, receptive to feedback?
and asking for specific examples, like you said, is,
Right.
I think, really important. You know, somebody can say, yeah, we're receptive, but that doesn't really mean a lot.
I think another thing to consider is also the culture, like within the residents themselves. So not only between like the residents and the faculty, but what's the culture like with the residents themselves? Do they seem like they're getting along together? Do they, you know, some things that like I would interpret as, you know, good culture would be like, oh, they like to hang out with each other outside of work. You know, that was kind of, to me, signaled, you know, a good resident culture that hopefully, you know, support each other.
I agree. So we have about 5 minutes left and we don't want to go over. We want to be respectful of all of your time. So we have a couple questions in the chat box. Dr. Henson and Dr. Tendulkar, if we could do some rapid fire on these just to be respectful of their time. So the first one is, so we touched on clinical education, how to talk about, or how to, you know, judge that at a program. We talked about culture. So can we have some discussion regarding the approach to a TY or prelim year process? That's kind of the next question.
I'm not sure.
Maybe Nima and I should touch on this.
Yeah.
Okay. So TY or prelim year, I used the same letters of recommendation for my RadOnc and my prelim year. You're obviously just there for a year and they know that. They're not trying to get you to jump to internal medicine or surgery. So I just applied to programs that were basically the same programs as the RadOnc residency programs I was interested in. And I tried to interview at the same time. If there was a RadOnc interview that you got accepted to and you didn't get invited to that TY or prelim, usually I'd send them an email and just let them know I was going to be interviewing. That was in person. So I don't know virtually how that changes, but for me, I just kind of tried to, in my mind, process like where I was interviewing for RadOnc and also try to have a spot for prelim year there. Nima?
I think I would agree with what Alexis said. And really, there's really no preference like TY versus prelim year. I think it's really up to you and what you think is going to best serve, you know, your educational goals and your locational goals for that year. So another quick question we have down here. How long do virtual interview days tend to be? So should they anticipate half a day, a full day? What are your thoughts?
Ours, I say usually last year, our first year of doing virtual interviews, ours were half a day. I'm sure that they vary.
Yep, ours were also half a day.
But don't forget, they'll be usually the night before. There'll be like kind of in place of a dinner that we used to go to, they'll kind of be like a meet and greet to get to know the residents. And usually it's just the residents the night before, so you can get to know them. There might be a program director or faculty step in and out of the virtual meet and greet, but usually it's just a time to ask, you know, the kind of down to earth questions, really get a feel for the program, ask the questions that you're too afraid or don't want to ask faculty.
I highly recommend attending those.
Yeah. And so one last question. So someone wants to know, you know, can we tailor, so I think we talked about this, we can tailor the personal statement to our program of interest. Should we be doing that for all the programs of interest or keep that to a limited number?
If you do it for all of them, it's going to probably seem really cut and pasty, and you don't want it to seem that way. So either don't tailor it at all or just do it for a couple of places and make it very different.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Great. Okay, so with that, I'd like to thank both Dr. Henson and Dr. Tendulkar for taking the time and joining us today, talking about the application process and answering all of your questions. I think the thing we'll conclude with today, we have a little survey for our participants here just to gauge how we did and hopefully have things to improve for next year. So if we could pull up that poll, we'll give you guys the remaining minute here to answer that. And then, you know, we'll be available on Twitter as well. So we'll be posting about the application process on our ACRA resident Twitter account. So definitely follow us there. And we're, you know, if you tweet at us, we're also more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
And make sure you follow us on Twitter and also check out the Rover sessions. There's great Rover sessions for medical students. So being probably virtual interviews, programs will start having meet and greets. It's a great way to get to know a program before the applications are actually accepted, or you're applying for interviews. So try to go to those meet and greets. We're on our Twitter. We're going to try to put kind of a list of all of them, so you're not searching all over Twitter trying to figure out when each program's doing it. So take a look at that as well.
Thanks,
Thank
Nima.
you,
Alexis.
everyone, for coming.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Good luck to everyone.
Thank you.